We're good to go.
Awesome.
Going good?
Yep.
Okay, friend, I can't really hear you too well, so I'm gonna just put your volume up.
Is that better?
All right, go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's a lot better. So, biggest news in the last week or so, and Daniel, you're actually the one who put me on this, so you actually sent me the whole thing, and I got it, and I was reading it, right? And this is the thing for me. I was reading it, and I just felt like this was a lot of fluff to an extent. So that was my first initial reaction. The next, so I then read it again, and I just feel like it was saying a lot of things. It was speaking a lot, and it was using all these terms.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, I feel like it was saying nothing really that I could grab onto and say that this is where Xbox and Sega is going. I know where Microsoft and Sega are going, but it didn't really tell me anything new about the relationship per se. It told me what Microsoft and Sega are doing, but not so much Xbox. And I think there is a okay, so if we read in between the lines, I think we could look at the Sarah aspect of it, right? But before we get into all that, let's hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I want to talk about this one because, like, for the last two days, maybe 3, that it's been like the entirety of my Twitter feed has been this, and it's been just absolutely wild on both ends. Like, you've got people sort of closer to the Xbox side of things who are like, oh, they acquired Sega, and like they didn't. And then there's people who I think are probably more over on the PlayStation side of things, like, this means nothing, this is nothing, like this is the exact same as the PlayStation thing or whatever. And it's like it's not that either. Like, it's definitely somewhere in the middle, you know what I mean? Like, because it is exactly what you said, right? Like the press release for it doesn't say a whole lot. Like, it's a lot of fluff and a lot of just really dense, like, business talk that doesn't really go anywhere. But I think if you read into it a little bit, you can see that it's, this is not an acquisition. It's not anything like that. It doesn't even necessarily mean anything about, like, Xbox getting exclusive Sega games or anything like that. But what it does show, and I think maybe the reason why I was so, like, kind of already looking for it is because I had just done my video about, like, Xbox in Japan, and this is exactly the kind of thing that they need to do in Japan in order to start making more of a name for themselves over there. You know what I mean? Because
sorry. No, go ahead.
Oh, because it's like, this doesn't necessarily mean a whole lot by itself, but when you pair it with a lot of the other things that have been going on between Sega and Microsoft, Xbox in particular, things like it being Xbox who finally brought Phantasy Star Online over to the West, or like, all the Yakuza games going into Game Pass, and like Sega talking about how great Game Pass has been for them, and like, all these rumors about, how great their relationship is being. And I think that this is, another step in that direction where, they're starting to sort of get more credibility over there. And I think that this, like I said, this doesn't mean that, like, that they like, this is not a they acquired Sega story, or like they're going to get exclusive games from Sega. But I think what this does mean is that you're going to stop having the thing where, like, some Sega games don't come to Xbox. Like I think that this is another step in the right direction that will mean that in future, like don't be surprised if Persona 6 comes to Xbox, or if like Persona 5 Royal or even Persona 4 Golden get ported over to Xbox. Like, this is just another step in like improving the relationship that will cause those things to happen. You know what I mean? I think that's kind of exciting.
I'll give my critique on that. Not because you're wrong. I think you're right.
No, yeah.
But friend, how about you, man? When you heard this news, what was the first thing that popped into your mind?
Well, my Twitter feed was slightly different, but again, it's different audiences interpreting this in the same thing. So
you're a PlayStation guy, right?
No, I'm actually following. I've definitely a lot of friends for a lot of retro gamers who grew up when Sega was a big player, which they're not what they used to be by a far stretch of the imagination. But they are probably the last big truly Japanese company. I mean, Nintendo's Japanese, but Nintendo's Japanese the same way Disney's American. You know they represent it, but you don't look at Nintendo and think of Japan. But I look at Sega, Yakuza, what the Atlas games, Persona and SMT are doing, and yet they're putting out quality stuff. And what you said about the Xbox is doing so much better in Japan than it used to be. So this makes a lot of sense. They want to grow there. They want to build their audience. They want this Japanese publisher on board and releasing their games on Xbox. And yeah, using Microsoft's technology, it makes a lot of sense. And I do hope one of the things that occurred to me, and again, maybe this is my bias from having a lot of friends into retro gaming, something that really annoys me about Sega is when they want to go retro, they always just turn to the Sega Mega Drive or Genesis, which is great, but I'm so fed up of seeing the same 20 games year after year. Oh, we ported it. It's on mobile now. It's on the Nintendo Switch. But there's some really good games on the Saturn, some really good games on the Dreamcast, which they just seem to be having struggle to emulate. And cloud gaming, get it up running, working on Microsoft's ecosystem. I could see that working. And then even then, Microsoft originally, before Microsoft had Xbox, they're the ones who got Sega online with the Dreamcast. And okay, failed experiment, but that started a relationship, which this is 20 plus years later. They're still clearly very close to each other and have a lot of trust. The thing that kind of surprised me is when Sega fell from grace and they fell hard, they split to the four winds, and they put some stuff on Xbox, they put some stuff on PlayStation, they put some stuff on Nintendo, and they seem to be very segmented. They never dared put all the eggs in one basket, which I often look back and think, what if they had just gone all in with Microsoft? I think things might have been quite different for them. I don't think they will. I don't think it's in Sega to do that. They're not going to abandon the other ecosystems, and they're too big. Okay, maybe they're not too big for Microsoft to buy if Microsoft really wanted to, but this isn't that. This is a very strategic partnership to make sure the games are suitable for Microsoft. But that's a different question from will they? I do think their retro titles and releases are primed for Microsoft cloud gaming. Mm-hmm. Ongoing stuff, I don't know. Sega's a weird company. I hate to predict the stuff that you think is an easy win, they won't do just to spite themselves. That's their track record.
Right. Like how they have still consistently failed to port any of the older Persona games or any SMT games, and it's they finally put Golden on PC, and it's you can put Golden over if it's already on PC, you can put it pretty much anywhere at this point. Everything's kind of a PC.
And they're like, oh, we'll try Golden on PC to test the water, and it's been so clear and obvious that it was a success, and yet we're a year and a half on and we've heard nothing.
Yeah, I think from a Microsoft perspective, this is good. I think it looks good for them in Japan. I think that's Sony now and that's Sega, so that's two huge Japanese publishers, using Azure. So I think from a Microsoft side of things, I think this is great. From an Xbox side of things, I think obviously by default we're going to say it's great for them too. But I don't know if this story tells me anything particularly new. So I guess for me, the main issue here was this, is my definition. Okay, what's my perception of Sega's relationship on Xbox? I thought it was actually pretty good. So okay, let's take a step back for a second. Do you guys remember when the Capcom 5 was announced?
Oh yeah,
for the
PS2.
Nintendo GameCube. And for the GameCube. So that was basically Resident Evil 4. That was Beautiful Joe. That was, I think, Dead Phoenix. And I think that was Piano 3. So when Capcom made that announcement, that had you excited because you knew exactly what you're getting. You're going to get 5 exclusive games from Capcom. This announcement didn't even do nothing like that. So for me, there was nothing too special. I'm thinking, okay, well, we were thinking they were going to get acquired. They didn't get acquired. So this is a step back from that. But there was no commitment to any new games or any new, okay, we're publishing something. It was all Azure. And I'm like, yeah, that's great. But what about the games? So if I look at it from a different angle, my thing is this: Sega. I believe Sega and Microsoft have a good relationship. I think they have a great relationship. I think it's going to keep growing. If Persona 6 comes out exclusively on the PlayStation, I would be shocked. Before this announcement, I would have been shocked. If Shinigami Tensei, if all Sega's games were coming out still, let's say, exclusive on Nintendo or whatever, I would be surprised. They've praised Game Pass so much, and I feel like that relationship was so good that it's gone to the point now where we can expect Sega games on an Xbox, on a Microsoft ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
So this strategic agreement, it didn't actually. It just, for me, it just affirmed that. Now I could be wrong because
I do have to just hold one with Persona and SMT. Atlas is a subsidiary of Sega, but they have maintained their self-identity quite strongly. So Sega's always had this, multiple split personality thing where what one part of the company is doing, another part will just ignore. And in fact, they'll do the complete opposite to spite it. So I would love to see more Atlas games and more consoles, and it's a crying shame that they seem so focused on one game and one console at a time, which is made even worse by the fact they keep switching the console.
But I think even from a financial perspective, though, like you're right about Atlas being a subsidiary, but I think if Sega throws them the finance, I think you can get a parallel development situation. I can't imagine a situation where Persona 6 is not coming out on Xbox. Now we could talk about Game Pass. I think they might go down the Bandai Namco route where we might see, similar to Scarlet Nexus, we might see in a couple of months or whatever. So I'm not really going to say Persona 6 is going to arrive on Game Pass day and date, but I expect it to be on a Microsoft system. I expect it to be on PC, and I expect it to be on Xbox. Maybe Xbox first, maybe PC might come out a bit later. So this whole situation, it didn't tell me anything new. I always assumed they had a great relationship, and I always knew we were going to move on from there. I think the only thing for me to take away from this is, and this is maybe me a bit, I don't want to say reaching, because I'll give an example. When Microsoft bought Bethesda, I could go to my friends and people and debate as to if this game is going to be exclusive or not. I felt I had enough to actually go on. Moving on from when they did the roundtable with Phil Spencer and the guys in Bethesda, Tom Howard and all that. When Phil says legacy titles, we're still going to do the stuff with legacy titles. I could go back and say this is what legacy means for Microsoft. Mm-hmm. So it means that you're going to see them do certain things. You might see a Skyrim remaster. You might see them do this kind of stuff, but you're not going to see a Skyrim. You're not going to see an Elder Scrolls 6. You're not going to see a Doom 3 or whatever it may be. You're not going to see new titles from Bethesda. And so far, that's been proven so far to be correct. I think we have the Skyrim Legendary Edition, the Skyrim what edition is this one called now?
I don't even. I think it's like anniversary collection or something.
Something like that.
The fourth one.
so far I felt good enough. Like I feel like I've been on point when it comes to this one, this or that. If I went to, let's say, one of my friends and I said, "Oh, this is what the strategic agreement means," he would say, "Yeah, but I thought you said Sega and Microsoft were already good in the first place. So was there a new game announced?" Now what we did here was this super game. Right. And for me, that just tells me that the super game will likely be on Xbox as well. It doesn't say it's going to be exclusive. It doesn't say if it's going to be a Game Pass title. But I always felt that there was going to be something like this in the first place. So this whole strategic agreement was very, I don't want to say underwhelming. I think for Microsoft it's a win. So okay. So go ahead, man.
There is one other consideration that I've been looking over the Sega big franchises. And there are a couple of series they've got out there that will really benefit from this, but are still at the moment completely separate from the Xbox ecosystem. So one of Sega's biggest franchises, the Total War series, that they've had the publishing rights of since mid 2000s. That's always been a Windows. It's been a PC, Mac, Linux release. It's never really touched consoles properly. And that's the kind of stuff that could benefit from this. And I've never quite understood why it's not come to consoles, particularly with Microsoft. Maybe moving it into the cloud would make it easier to make that thing. But it's definitely the alliance with Microsoft means they're building in their computer framework tools quite strongly. Whether that means it will be Xbox or not, I don't know. But Microsoft will benefit from it. Full stop.
Yeah, and I think that's the main thing I was trying to really push on, because when you look at this, so once again, I looked at the legacy situation with the roundtable. Look at strategic agreement. I know I wrote this definition down somewhere. Goddamn. But anyway, it's basically just in the like there needs to be some type of mutual beneficial situation for both companies.
Right.
And you might argue that like, okay, well that means games on the Xbox ecosystem, on the Microsoft ecosystem. True, yes, but you could also argue that it doesn't necessarily like what's beneficial for Sega and Microsoft is very different to. They might interpret it very differently. Yeah. So I'll give you an example in the sense that for Microsoft, okay, let's look at Game Pass for example, right? From a Game Pass perspective, these companies that are, that have high praises for Game Pass. One of the reasons why they do that is because obviously Microsoft has ensured that like they're not in a losing position. But from a Microsoft perspective, is paying this game, whatever it may be, $5 million, $4 million, is that actually worth it? Are they getting profits back? And the answer is probably no. But what it does do is it keeps their subscribers happy on Game Pass. So they view success differently from what another company might view success. So Microsoft having Sega, one of the biggest probably video game publishers in Japan, using Azure is probably just a win. So that in itself could be the strategic alliance in terms of benefits. What do you think about that, Daniel?
Yeah, so in terms of like, how it benefits Sega, I think that's, like you said, I think that's fairly obvious. They get use of all this technology and then, can use it to make their super game, whatever that is. And I think that people sort of get hung up on the idea of like, oh, it's a cloud, they're using the cloud. It's a cloud game. Like it has to be online. It has to be all this stuff. Right. And, there's sort of these like preconceived notions of like what the game using the cloud as like a tool means. And I don't think that's necessarily the case. Like when you look at a game like Sea of Thieves, yes, they are an online game, obviously, so maybe it's not a great example, but what they use the cloud technology for is to make the water, look and act as good as it does. So it's just basically a way of like having extra processing power, which means that like future Sega games could potentially end up being way larger in scope and like more demanding without necessarily having to tax the platforms. And if in terms of how it benefits Xbox, I don't know necessarily that they would do it. They've been very friendly with different developers in the past, so I don't know if they would, but like they could very easily be like, if you're using our technology, then we want it to be exclusive to our ecosystem, and I don't think necessarily they would do that. I think those games would do better in other places, but if they wanted to, like they could very easily like pull some of those games either into Game Pass or into exclusivity for Xbox. They'd probably still have to pay for it, obviously, but you know what I mean? Like the relationship is there to where the point where I think they would have kind of first dibs on some of these things.
That like that's a really great point you make. And the thing that comes to my mind the most is we can look at Spider-Man, Sony and Disney. It's pretty clear that the movie structure deal played a role in the gaming license right there, because they already have that relationship. They're already talking about, okay, fine, you want to use Spider-Man in your movies, whatever it may be. So I think it's that element of we have this relationship, we're actually doing things for you. And I think it makes the conversation easier. Whereas if Microsoft, for example, wanted to go talk to Square about certain things, it's extremely difficult. But with Sega, I feel it's just very easy. I think like they have that relationship is well established there. But anyways, sorry for coming across. I just went through.
No, you're fine. Yeah, absolutely. And then one of the things that that you were saying is also like that you would have already expected, like that they're like you already would have expected the partnership to have grown. Like you were saying, like you already knew that Xbox and Sega had like a good relationship, and that's totally fair and accurate. But I think when you look at sort of get maybe more into the nitty gritty of like what the deal is, and you look at the people who are involved, like I think you mentioned it earlier, like the fact that Sarah Bond is the person in charge of this team is very interesting, because she's the person who historically has gone out and gotten third-party exclusive deals for Xbox, right? So it's like, does that mean that there's going to be some kind of exclusivity going on here? Like it definitely feels like there's more to this. And to the thing that Fred said earlier about just like, going to Dreamcast and going to some of those other things, like the way that Xbox does their backwards compatibility now is just through emulation. So theoretically, if they could get the legal rights to it, they could make it so that you could play old Dreamcast or Sega games on the Xbox through emulation. I mean, you probably wouldn't be able to put the disc in necessarily, because I don't think that they read the same way anymore, but like they could make it so that you could go and like buy something like, the what was it, like the original Shenmues I think were on there, or like Panzer Dragoon. The Dreamcast is kind of a blank space in my knowledge bank, but like there were games there that people have a lot of affinity for, and if you were able to make those backwards compatible and get them onto the Xbox through some kind of weird like legal jujitsu, that'd be crazy, right?
Yeah. No, 100%. Friend, what are your thoughts on that? Sorry for cutting you off.
No, I completely agree. And the other thing Sega's really good at is cross using their IP. So they've done a lot of things of taking their characters and just going out to indie games and other small publishers and saying, "Oh, do you want a Sonic the Hedgehog costume for your theme hospital, or would you like this arcade game that we published in the 1980s to be playable in Yakuza? Is it Like a Dragon?" They've just released a load of their old arcade machines that you can go up and as if you were playing these very old machines in the arcade. So Sega's really interested in taking stuff they have on the back catalogue and looking at ways they can repurpose it. The other thing, I looked at the announcement and said, okay, global online community IP utilization. And again, we're moving away from their console games, but I mentioned Total War before. You've also, one of the other niche not talked about outside the community, but it's there. They've got the second most important football or soccer for our American audiences IP is Football Manager. Now it takes the complete opposite approach where you're essentially managing the team, but it's all about simulation. Now cloud, using the cloud to actually get that simulation running as smoothly and as detailed as possible. There's a lot you could do here when you take the processing power out of the computer or the mobile device you're running at. You run all the games on the cloud, use Microsoft's technology to actually run it, make sure it runs smoothly. Sega benefits, Microsoft benefits. Hopefully it's on the Xbox ecosystem, but that remains to be seen. But there will be games. There will definitely be games. But I'm still sort of scratching my head and going, are they the ones we're expecting? I'm unsure.
Yeah, I think like I mentioned with the Capcom 5 situation where, when Capcom says, hey, listen, we're going to have this established franchise, called Resident Evil, and we're going to put exclusively on the GameCube, like that's a show of statement. That's a show of like progress right there. And then when you say, okay, we're going to develop Beautiful Joe, we're going to develop all these things. So Daniel, when you sent me the agreement, I'm just like,
Yeah, maybe it wasn't the best piece of information to send you regarding it, because I think the thing that I sent you was literally just the legal document that was just like the thickest, most incomprehensible nonsense.
Yeah, I was like, okay, there's no acquisition here. There's no games here. Like, what is this nonsense? I just don't get me wrong. I think it's good. I think it's actually, I think from an image perspective, it really puts Microsoft in a very good light, and also it shows that like, hey, we have this really strong relationship with this Japanese company, and I think and they're they're Sega, so I think that's great for them. But can I go around telling people like, yo, games are coming from this? I think I can tell them a super game is coming from this, but if I'm being very frank.
Well, they've mentioned the super game before, but only only vaguely. I think they've said whatever this super game is, that it's actually new IP.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the, so I couldn't tell anyone anything new per se. Like the only thing I could say is, as you mentioned, Daniel, is like, Sarah was in front and she's heading this, and I think that's great, because obviously when it comes to games, that's what you're looking for. Are we gonna get new games from this? As you said, friend, I actually really don't know from what I was expecting. I expected Persona 6 on an Xbox ecosystem. I expect I'm sorry, on the Microsoft ecosystem. I expect all these Atlas games to eventually show up somewhere somehow too eventually.
But
So
the crazy thing is that should just happen without this agreement. That's
Also
money in
true.
the bank that Sega's just been walking away from for years.
yeah,
So I wouldn't need to see this statement of intent that the two companies will work closer together for that to happen. But you referenced the Capcom 5. Just it struck me that Capcom did that, and then over half, not all of them, but over half those games, they made their way to PlayStation 2 years later. It
Yeah.
was a very short-lived. It was a very short-lived exclusivity, but Sega's track record, when they say something's exclusive, they mean it. It sits there. It usually comes out on PC as well. But games that they've stuck their Sega ages, their retro library on Nintendo, and everyone at Microsoft and Sony's just going, but we want to play them as well. And then the Persona franchise was on PlayStation exclusively for such a long time. There's no sensible reason for any of this.
Yeah, because to your point there, when you think about Square Enix, and you think about the new Final Fantasy, that's because Sony has, paid them like, okay, we're gonna pay for this exclusive, for a 1 year time exclusive or whatever it may be. I don't think there's a deal in that place for any of these Shinigami games, any of the I might be saying that incorrectly, sorry, any of these Persona games. So it really doesn't make sense. It just makes sense that it should be there, especially with the fact that Xbox is actually doing well in Japan, and especially with the fact that Sega likes Game Pass. So everything just kind of fits perfectly for me. So I guess you're right. This agreement doesn't necessarily. It might not be needed to tell everyone, but I just feel like it was more of an affirmation of what I think was going on in the first place.
Yeah, and that's 100% fair, because genuinely this deal, the way that it is right now, obviously we'll see how it pans out, but it could mean nothing, or it could mean everything. You know what I mean? This could be there's a lot of people going around talking about with Project Dragon, for I think that's the one that IO is doing, or how Crystal Dynamics is helping out with what's it called, Perfect Dark. How people are saying that those are ways of testing the water to see if acquisition is possible down the line. In a crazy world, this could be that for Sega. So this could literally be absolutely nothing. It could mean, hey, we're just doing cloud stuff, it means nothing, whatever. Or it could be this is another step towards acquisition of Sega. And I think it's just a really interesting topic, because there is so much possibility from this.
Yeah, I thought about this what you were saying, because a partner was saying, why would they need to go down the strategic agreement first of all if they just want to acquire them? They can acquire them, they got the dough. But then I thought about it in a different way, the same way how we talk about how maybe Sony wants to work with certain developers first of all, and then same thing with maybe Microsoft now is doing with Crystal Dynamics. It's a possibility. And maybe if you're integrating your systems like Azure into the company, maybe it makes that transition a lot easier when you actually acquire them. I mean, obviously this is all speculation, but it's something I did think about.
Yeah, it's just a really exciting topic to me. Just for all the reasons that we've said. And it's I think that one of the things that people get really hung up on with it, or at least from what I've been seeing on Twitter, is the idea of oh, this is exactly the same thing that they had with PlayStation, because on paper it looks very similar, but the difference, if you go back and read through the stuff, is in the one that they did with Sony, there's a lot of talk about we're going to use this for services, we're going to use this for streaming and stuff like that. Whereas in this Sega agreement, it is very much this is for games. We're making games, super games. And it's okay, cool. That's what I want to hear.
Yeah, I thought that super game reference, it always put a smile on my face when I read it. Super game.
I don't know what that means, but I'm excited to see, I guess.
Yeah, no, I do think it's great for Microsoft. I think it's actually really good for Sega as well. One thing that did pop into my mind is apart from Sega, I am hoping Microsoft is reaching out to these other Japanese publishers and developers. I know their relationship with Square is maybe getting a bit better with Final Fantasy. I think 14 is showing up on the console. But I'm really hoping, like, a publisher that I think is, I don't know, just blows my mind is Bandai Namco. I'm looking at Scarlet Nexus. I'm looking at Tales of Arise, and I'm thinking, maybe I think they also have Code Vein as well, and those are games I never actually really touch apart from Scarlet Nexus, but for some reason, like, they keep popping up on my feed as these are like a top tier publisher right now. So I would actually love for Microsoft to actually reach out to them and develop their relationship with them a bit. I think it'd be great to start to see a lot of their games as well on Game Pass. And hey, listen, if when people are talking about like acquisitions, there was Sega, there was Square. I'm like, listen, Bandai Namco is pretty good. They're dropping some great gems.
They're going to be a lot less expensive than either of those other two.
Exactly, but like I didn't feel like they're ones that like they have these IPs now and I think just blow.
It's a weird one though, because Sega and Capcom, they're big Japanese companies, but they're big. Whereas Bandai Namco's gaming division isn't massive, but they've got all the toy stuff associated alongside it. And I don't know if Microsoft would want anything to do with that.
That's a good point, actually, because I remember that one of the things that people were always citing, or at least recently, as to like why the Sega acquisition was more possible now than before was because they had not separated, but they like segregated, I guess, the gaming division from like the gambling division. Like they separated Sega from Sammy in some degree. And so it was like they could just buy the gaming division and like leave, the company formerly known as Sega, I guess, at that point to do all their weird pachinko nonsense.
Yeah, I don't know. Retrospectively, given what we're seeing about regulations about gambling in video games slowly, very slowly coming in, that feels like a very smart move to actually separate and say this is the gambling side and this is the side that actually cares about making games. But yeah, we'll see how that plays out.
Quick question in relation to Sega and arcades in Japan. Are they still in that business?
I think so. Yeah, I remember that there was one really popular one that had been shut down, but I think they just reopened it somewhere else. Because if you've ever played the Yakuza games, it seems like that would be them just kind of faking it, but there's like giant Sega arcades in that. But those are real. That exists. There's just giant, I think they're called like Sega Towns or something. I
might have been mistaken, but I actually thought like they owned a host of arcades all around Japan. I don't know. I thought
that's what they sold off. They sold off the build. They used to own the buildings that the arcades were in, so they ran the whole business.
Okay.
But that's what they sold off. Was it last year? They sold off and separated out the part of the business that actually owned and operated. So the games and the arcade machines within them, they're still I don't know how much they're still manufacturing, but those arcades are still theirs. The IP is still theirs. It's just they're no longer interested in physically maintaining the space in the real world.
Oh, because I was thinking what if a strategic alliance involved Microsoft putting Game Pass on all these arcades, on streaming, whatever. I was thinking, is that like a possibility?
That would be mental if they went ahead that way.
I was just thinking, you just take over the whole country when you do that.
We can do that though. Arcades are really big in Japan. If they could partner with Sega in such a way that because they do a thing with their fighting games where they'll literally just line up cabinets and it'll be these are all in a tournament and you play against each other like that. If they did that but for Halo and it was okay, red team over here, blue team over here, and just made it an event to go and go to this arcade and play Halo against all your friends, that'd be really cool. I would want to do that.
Or even a situation where you just say hey, if you have Game Pass, every arcade is just free. You can play you don't need to put in $50, 50 cents or whatever it is. You just play. I don't know.
It's a mad, brilliant idea, but actually Sega's one of the few companies that could do that for Microsoft if they really wanted to.
I'm thinking this strategic agreement, I'm looking a bit too much, because if I told my friend this, he'd be like, nah, stop. You're reaching now. And I'm like, yeah, probably reaching.
And to be fair, it is reaching. But the fact that it is possible is exciting to theorize about. It probably won't happen.
Yeah, the only reason it won't happen is to be too good. Sega doesn't do stuff. Sega does stuff that's 90% perfect, but 10% just awful. And this is just 100% perfect, so it won't happen.
Yeah, because when I was thinking, like when I was doing that video on how ex Microsoft can go to Japan, that was one of the ideas that came to my mind. Like, you know what, yo, they have all the arcades, and if you can somehow put Xbox in there and get your games in there, and you can do some kind of deal, like, hey, instead of paying 50 cents a turn, if you just have Game Pass, like, bam, like you get free arcade every time. And I was thinking such a good way to. I was like, I'm sounding very evil and very corporate now. I don't really like the way I'm talking, to be honest. Like,
if they did that though, you would definitely see those Game Pass numbers go way up because arcades are big business over there.
That's what we want, isn't it? Though.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I think we kind of we touched on all the Xbox and Sega news there. I think we all understand, like, it's a good thing for Microsoft. Definitely, it's a good thing for Xbox too as well. It's a good thing for Sega. Does it tell us anything new? No, I think we just have to wait to find out what is actually going to happen. I always assumed they had a great relationship, so this didn't really change that too much. But then again, I could be proven wrong. But they said a lot of things, but they didn't really say too much as well. That's just maybe my main issue with this. And of course, I was comparing it to the Capcom 5, where I actually got games, they actually told me was coming through. So,
well, this is even more vague than that. It's one big game, one super game.
Super game.
So,
let's not get it twisted. Super game.
Yeah, and it's this is also, I think, partially because it's been announced so early into this partnership, because it's one of those things that like has to be made public knowledge when two companies this size get together in really any capacity. So it does kind of feel, obviously it's not, on the same level as the Bethesda acquisition, but it does remind me a little bit of like when they had to first announce that they were preparing to acquire them, but hadn't actually done it yet. And so they couldn't say certain things. Like they weren't able at that point to be like, yes, these games are going to be exclusive, because like they didn't know like it wasn't the same company yet. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
but the just final point for me, the one thing this does show is Microsoft's come a long way in the way they can actually talk to non-American companies, because they used to have this reputation of just saying the wrong thing and offending people they didn't understand. But I mean, they've had a good relationship with Sega before, but it is good to see that they are still thinking globally.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Like, especially with that statement when you said Microsoft offending. I think it was for Resident Evil 4, and they were looking to get that on the system, and I think the meeting ended very, very quickly. It was like, yeah, they're talking nonsense, and that was it. So they have definitely come a long way, and I think the numbers say so as well. And I think just the fact that, like, I think we can always we know the Xbox One messed up big time. But the fact that it's about to outsell the Series S, or sorry, the Xbox Series is about to outsell the Xbox One. I think at the end of this year, I think that's huge for them. So it does show them that, like, they've done the right things in developing these relationships with these publishers, and I expect good things, and I expect Persona 6 as well.
I hope that game comes out sooner than the gap between 4 and 5.
I don't know the gap. What was the gap? Was it that bad?
It's like 12 or 15 years. Like, it was a long time.
Nearly 2 whole console generations, yeah.
I mean, I feel like it's gonna be streaming by then.
Yeah.
Consoles will be dead. No, I'm just playing. Any final thoughts, guys, before we just round up, before we finish off?
No, I think I'm good.
No, I think that's all good. Cheers.
All right, Jamil and Genk. I'm gonna say that wrong. Genkai. Yeah, I mean, listen, guys, thanks for coming through and chatting away. We'll be doing this again, maybe this weekend actually, and we'll talk about something else, Cyberpunk potentially. But anyways, thanks for coming through, guys. Ciao now.
No problem. Anytime.
Bye.